Now, the National Grid's forecast suggests that supply could be a real issue this week with this cold snap across the country. What would Labour do to secure the country's energy supply?
Well, we think this needs a proper overhaul. We should be developing Britain's green energy resources, our wind power, our tidal power. This is part of tackling climate change, but it's also about getting us proper energy security in this country and having proper long-term plans. So Keir Starmer set out a green prosperity plan that would be about investing in that renewable energy of the future. That would cut our energy bills and also give us that security and mean we're doing our bit for zero carbon.
Yeah, so that's a long-term plan. What would you do about the real short-term urgent issues facing people who are now living in freezing conditions in parts of the country and who just can't afford to heat their homes? And what would Labour do?
And that's why we called for the energy price freeze and also a proper windfall tax on the oil and gas companies' excess profits, because as a result of the
But the Conservative government have done both of those things.
Yeah, and they've still got some loopholes, though, in the windfall
What
tax.
difference does that make to someone who doesn't have money in the bank to pay their energy bills?
So I think you've got to have the support. We've also called for stronger action on particularly those who have the prepayment meters, because those are often people who've got the real biggest pressure of all, and also you're seeing people being forced onto prepayment meters at the moment as well. So more and more people in that situation, that is causing huge hardship for people. And look, we shouldn't have been in this situation because you've seen this situation coming for a long time. The building up of the Conservatives' economic mismanagement. We've had 12 years building up to this cost of living crisis, the disastrous mini budget that we had in the autumn, and now people being asked to pay the price of that, which is just deeply unfair at a really tough time for people.
OK, on to strikes now. Royal Mail workers striking today. This government thinks it's economically impossible to give a pay rise to public sector workers in line with inflation. Would you be able to find the money to do that?
Well, nobody wants to see the disruptive strikes. I think that includes also a lot of the workers who are involved. But again, people are facing a real cost of living crisis, and that's why you have to have the plan to deal with the cost of living crisis. And what we also want to see is government ministers getting round the table to actually negotiate some deals to prevent the kind of disruption that people are worried about by getting round the table and doing deals. There was some really worrying reports that the ministers had actually stepped in to prevent the rail strikes being resolved and to prevent offers being put that might have resolved the rail strikes. Well, you know, what are they up to? It looks like they're just addicted to chaos and trying to make conflicts worse rather than trying to get round the table and sort things out.
So if you were in power and you had a spot at those negotiating tables right now, what would you be offering in terms of a pay rise to public sector workers?
So that's a matter for those negotiations. I think Rachel Reeves has said she's not going to pick figures out of thin air, and the negotiations have to look at some of the working condition issues as well, because given an example for nursing and for the NHS, part of the challenge that people are facing is having come through the COVID crisis, they're understaffed, there's huge numbers of vacancies, they're really stretched. And one of the things Labour's announced is we would double the number of medical training places, district nurses, a huge increase in the number of trained people. As Wes Streeting said, it's like the cavalry's coming with Labour. That is what we would do to get those extra staff in place to ease the pressures that people are facing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up NHS workers because, you know, I've spoken to a number of nurses. Morale is at rock bottom.
It really is.
And as you say, they're essential workers. There's a huge shortage of them right now. So would you give them the 19% pay rise that they're asking for?
Well, pay needs to be part of the negotiations. That has to be a negotiation. And as Rachel said, it's got to be the negotiations that resolve that. We do think that people should be paid fairly. And that means that's also why we've got a plan to grow the economy, because we want people to have better pay, not just in the public sector, in the private sector as well. You've got to have that plan. The reason we're in this situation is we've had 12 years of low growth. That's why we've then got 12 years of being the public services being run down by the Conservatives, and they're making public sector workers pay the price. That is not fair. People should be paid fairly for the jobs that they're doing.
Absolutely. But for NHS staff listening, you're not guaranteeing that they would get any more money under a Labour government than they're currently being offered?
Well, the thing that we're guaranteeing is that the Labour ministers will be getting round the table and would be talking to them, would be working with them, and would be trying to get a deal and agreement in place, because we recognise really the huge pressure that nurses and NHS staff have been placed under, the key workers who got us through this crisis, and we would be recognising that and recognising that people do need to be fairly rewarded, that we've got to have those negotiations in place, but you've also got to have a proper long-term plan to get the nursing staff in place, and we would abolish the non-dom status, the tax break for some of the richest people in the country in order to pay for that. That is a fair choice that Labour would make, that the Conservatives are currently refusing to make. Rishi Sunak is refusing to do that.
OK, let's move on to migration, if I may. The Archbishop of Canterbury is leading a debate on UK asylum policy today. Now, Labour says it has a plan to immediately introduce fast-track processing for Albania and other safe countries. An immediate plan. What is that?
So at the moment, the system is in chaos. Decision-making in the Home Office has collapsed, and only around 2% of people who've arrived in small boats over the last 12 months have had their cases decided. For Albania, it's actually less than 1%. That's why you've then got this huge backlog that's grown up, because the Home Office isn't doing its job. And so what we would do is fast-track cases from designated safe countries, that includes Albania, so those cases can be swiftly decided and returned. That's what, where cases are unfounded, then they would need to be returned. That means you then can have a system where, for refugees, there is proper support for those who fled persecution and conflict. For those who are not refugees, then the system moves much more quickly. And we do that alongside targeting the criminal gangs, where, again, the Conservatives have completely failed to do that.
But do you accept that it's complicated? Some of these people who've come here from Albania are escaping human trafficking and other abuses. And indeed, the Albanian ambassador to the UK has said that, you know, Albanian school children are being bullied here in the UK because of this focus. So do you think that this rhetoric now from Labour focusing on Albanian migrants isn't it damaging?
So we've said this should be about designated safe countries. So that would include Brazil, it would include Moldova, it would include lots of different countries. The reason that obviously there has been the discussion about Albania is that there's been a big increase in recent months of people arriving from Albania. But you're right that the system has to be fair, and there have been cases, particularly women, Albanian women, being trafficked into sexual exploitation and abuse, and also Albanian children being trafficked as well. So the system has to make sure that it looks at the individual cases, but you can still do that and fast-track it. This is what other countries do, so Germany and Sweden and Switzerland. It's also what the United Nations Refugee Agency recommended, was a tracking system so that you can speed cases up. They recommended that to the British government 2 years ago. The Conservatives have refused to do it. So I think this is a common sense approach. You're right that we've got to be really sensible about this. We can't have the kind of ramping up the rhetoric that we have heard from Conservative ministers, just common sense instead.
And just one quick question on the Unite Union, if I may. Sky News broke that story yesterday of allegations of corruption at Unite Union now being investigated by the police. If indeed criminality does emerge, will Labour hand back the £750,000 in donations that they've been given by Unite?
There's got to be a proper investigation. You've obviously raised serious allegations. There has to be a proper investigation. And obviously, as Shadow Home Secretary, you wouldn't expect me to comment on the case where that there is a...
But if criminality does emerge, will you give them money back?
I think there is a criminal investigation underway. You wouldn't expect me as Shadow Home Secretary to comment on a police investigation. I think that wouldn't be appropriate. They need to be able to do their job and investigate allegations.
And if they find crime has been committed, will you give the money back?
Again, I think they've got to be able to do their job and investigate the allegations. It just wouldn't be appropriate. The Shadow Home Secretary, I can't comment on ongoing investigations.
So no confirmation either that you give them money back. OK, Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you.